Hello. As the U.S. will slap additional tariffs on roughly $200 billion worth of imports from China, Beijing will retaliate with tariffs on $60 billion worth of American imports. The China-U.S. trade war is escalating, but with the U.S. midterm elections approaching and the alleged division in the White House, President Trump is facing mounting pressures. How do we assess the escalating China-U.S. trade standoff? What should both sides do to manage their differences via dialogue, if any? And what shall be the consequences for global free trade? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined here by Professor Liu Zhiqian, Senior Research Fellow with the Chongyang Institute of Financial Studies at China's Renmin University, and Timothy Stratford, Managing Partner of Cummington Berlin LLP's Beijing office, also former Assistant U.S. Trade Representative or Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for China Affairs. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen. In the early stage of the current very tough, nail-biting negotiations about the trade disputes between the U.S. and China, I'd like to know whether China will be the first to blink as we are held at the gunpoint by the Trump administration. Tim?
Well, I think if the trade negotiators are doing their job, it won't be obvious which side is blinking. They'll create a situation where both sides can look like they're representing the interests of their own country and nevertheless reaching an agreement that works for both sides.
Level-headed enough. Zhiqian, what do you think of the Chinese response?
I think for China, we have been already preparing for such an event to happen for some months, I think.
Because only a few months?
I think this
Are
is
you
actual.
This is we have been caught unprepared.
No, this is actual and the practical pressure we have already in the several months. But actually, since he's beginning to election of by the campaign, so we have already been preparing that such an event could be happening when he took office. So this is true, what really happened. So for China's response, I think we have already calculated all the outcomes, and also we have been well prepared.
Well, look at the initial response from the Ministry of Commerce on the Chinese side. Tim, despite the brutal fact that, or brutal bluff by the Trump administration to slap tariffs on $200 billion worth of goods from China, the Chinese only came up with similar countermeasures on 60 billion. I mean, this is a kind of a serious imbalance. So what do you think of the modest and restrained measures by the Chinese side?
Well, the U.S. only imported $30 billion of Chinese goods last year, and so China already imposed tariffs on 50 billion the way the U.S. had. Now they've added 60. So it's already 110 out of 130 billion. So proportionately, actually China's imposed tariffs on a higher percentage of U.S. products than the U.S. has on China products. I think it's in China's interest to reserve something, and I think it's useful to be able to have some tariffs, some products that you're not putting tariffs on because there are some local importers that really need those products. And so far, the U.S. and China still have some space where they can import some products duty-free.
But given the traditional and the conventional approach of this unpredictable apprentice, namely President Trump, given his track record, and also in the broad context of the upcoming midterm congressional elections, do you think we deliberately reserve some margin, as Tim somehow suggested, for further negotiations so that politically we would not declare the death penalty for this poor guy in the White House?
I think many people now or in the public still have the similar idea or hope that Mr. Trump has given some space and room for further negotiation in order for his election in November. But I think such idea is too naive, you see. For Mr. Trump, I don't think he's really trying to take such measures for his election, because he has to win this election no matter what China retreat or not retreat. By the tariff war, he has to put all the pressure on China in order to win China, to overcome China. This is his final goal or final purpose. So I think in these 2 months, what he has to be done, that he has to pressure China to retreat from own position, and then he can announce his victory. So for the victory, he can win his election. So this is his absolute rare purpose for his election. But not too naive to think that he is so good to give our enough space for further negotiation. I don't believe him now.
You like it or not, what's going on between the two biggest economies in terms of the negotiations and the use of bluffs, this will definitely be taken into the textbooks for years to come for those who show great interest in studying the trade war. Now, Mr. Ollens, I wonder if my pronunciation of his name is correct, who is the chairman of the National Committee of U.S.-China Relations, said at the ceremony of the 50 People Economic Forum that perhaps China is barking at the wrong tree. We have exaggerated the importance of midterm elections because he said, if not quote, there is a bipartisan consensus in the D.C. that China is singled out and will be regarded as the most menacing threat to the U.S. national security. Whatever severity of the trade war between the two economies, the United States will not blink. And this is the only topic that can unite the two parties across the aisle. So when we look at the consequences of midterm elections, perhaps we show signs of being naive a little bit.
I agree with Steve Orlins that the midterm elections are not really a major factor in the U.S. calculation. I think it's true that there is a bipartisan consensus that the U.S. needs to readjust the trade relationship with China. So I don't think the timing of the election is going to play a pivotal role in how the negotiations pan out. I think what's more important is what are the nature of the issues that separate the two countries, and what is a solution that can work for both sides. And that's going to take quite a bit of time because these are very complicated issues. One other thing I would say, though, you talked about national security. When I was in charge of U.S.-China trade policy at USTR, that was from 2005 to 2010. I can tell you that national security or a desire to contain China was never once part of our discussion or part of our consideration when we were discussing how we should have trade negotiations with China. I continue to believe that the U.S. economic agencies, USTR, Treasury, Commerce, are not thinking about these trade negotiations in terms of containing China or in terms of national security, but they are thinking about them in terms of trade policy. And so I think the first step in resolving the trade dispute is having a clear understanding of what are the true underlying concerns. And they have to do with the fact that China's economic development model is proceeding in a way that we did not expect, where there is more state intervention in the economy than is what's normally regarded as normal within the WTO context. And because of that, we have a situation, the analogy I use is a game of football. Suppose we arrive at the football field to watch a game of football, and on one side we have the winner of the American Super Bowl, so this is American-style football. On the other side of the field, the winners of the World Cup. So this is soccer-style football.
Come on, we are not good at soccer, we're good at ping pong, which helped inaugurate the bilateral relationship back in the 1970s. But having said this, perhaps it's time to look at why domestic politics step in. I mean, national security was never the issue, but you may have underestimated those who surround the Oval Office of President Trump. People like Peter Navarro. You look at his book, and you got alarmed, shocked by the animosity that he has long harbored towards China and the emergence of the second biggest economy. So when you said national security was not the issue,
it was not
look
the
at the
issue.
landmark strategic documents unleashed by both the Pentagon and the White House. China has been undoubtedly regarded by both parties as the biggest threat, far higher than Russia and ISIL. I mean, we were all shocked.
I agree with you that the situation is more complicated now. I'm talking about the 5 years from 2005 to 2010. Since that time, I think geopolitical tensions between the United States have increased.
You have a good command of Mandarin. We have a popular saying, 此一时彼一时. Okay.
Time is different.
Yeah, we have different experiences and different circumstances. This time around, the United States seems to have been left disillusioned about the implications of China's fast expansion economically, and therefore it could be regarded by them across the aisle as a wake-up call. They say it will be too late for the United States if they don't punish China and contain China before it's too late. So what do you think of their consensus?
Yeah, actually, I agree with your comments because many people, including me, that I have to say, Mr. Trump is hijacked by his team now at the moment, especially for the major policy. He followed trade policy and also the policy towards China is hijacked by other colleagues. So his own is doing business, but others, beyond the business, beyond the trade, they want to have some other excuses, like as you said, national security. From the 1960s, you can see all the election, they have the national security as the main topics for the election against the Soviet Union. Now they take China as the national security threat, so as another channel to help the election. So that's why many Americans say that China helped the American election, president election, because China always is the major reason and the cause for this political dispute. But actually for the trade dispute, we have to discuss from other angle, because all the trade dispute, we have to see that another channel will see that for both people's life and the industrialization and the civilization and the human rights and also smart technology. So including all these aspects could be regarded as excuse that to stop and hinder China's development.
As a lawyer, Tim, you may not like the word like national security. However, what about the alleged conspiracy that China leads 5G and in our pursuit of 2025 blueprint and ambition, China will take the upper hand in the dogfight, vying for primacy of digital technology? I mean, this has a lot to do with the American national security.
Okay. So I'm not saying that national security is not relevant. What I'm saying is that the core of the dispute has to do with economic policies and whether our two systems are compatible like two different football teams on the field.
But the Chinese would always argue in a holistic view instead of focusing on specific tales. Given the track record of the S&D negotiations between the two governments for years, since perhaps George W. Bush, we tend to look at the general pictures, but the United States would always focus on details.
But the Chinese side also says we should solve the areas where we can agree and we should set aside where there are differences. If we look at the economic relationship, there are many areas where we can find solutions and where it's mutually beneficial. But I do agree with you that national security is more of a concern, and let me talk about why. It used to be that sensitive technologies were developed by the defense industries, and then over time civilian applications for those technologies would be developed. For example, GPS and a lot of other examples. However, today the private sector is developing many technologies that turn out to have military application and other national security application. So what that means is because sensitive technologies now are being used throughout the economy. They're used in our smartphones. They're used every day, big data, semiconductors, so on. So now separating national security from civilian uses and normal trade rules is more difficult than it used to be. So this is the part that's going to be especially hard for us to describe and to solve, but it doesn't cover all aspects of the bilateral relationship.
You know, Tim, China has been a humble student of the military-industrial complex, a phrase that was first coined by Eisenhower in the 1960s. You are watching Dialogue with Mr. Timothy Strafford, a former assistant trade representative of the United States, and Professor Liu Zhiqin with the Renmin University of China. We are talking about how the Chinese government has initially responded to the bluff by President Trump to inaugurate another $200 billion worth of Chinese imports. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back. Now, Tim and Zhiqin, We need to work out something that can be accepted by both sides. It shouldn't be a dead process. We have to move forward step by step in a way that may best conform to or with the national concerns and stakes from both sides. Now, look at the areas where we can make compromise. Let's focus on some of the steps that could be possibly taken, first of all, by the United States, instead of forcing us to the corner. I mean, that won't work for China.
I think it's important to try to understand the U.S. intentions. I think the conclusion made by the Trump administration is that there has been discussion between the two countries for quite some time on a number of issues, and we haven't really made progress, and therefore the Trump administration has decided we have to use something else. Normally you turn to the World Trade System, the WTO, to try to solve the problems. But it's interesting, when USTR published their report on their investigation, which is what led to these tariffs, they listed some harms that they think are caused to the U.S. by China. And then they listed 3 possible solutions. One of them was to bring a WTO case. And they've done that. But the WTO case only covers a very, very narrow technical issue. And if you look at all of the issues that are raised in the report, what this sort of shows is that the WTO doesn't have the tools to deal with the broad range of concerns. And so that's our first problem. We don't have agreed upon rules for how to deal with the problem.
Since the Doha round, in an effort to reform the flawed mechanism of the WTO, which was initiated with good intention by the United States, look at the anti-globalization protesters in Seattle a few years ago. I mean, this momentum of anti-globalization has been gathering ever since. So what do you think of the areas where China could possibly make concessions, despite the very conciliatory tone and remarks that President Xi Jinping has made, perhaps since the Winter Davos, namely China wants to positively look at the momentum of globalization. We want to be part of free trade, and China says we would further open up the financial sector, the service sector, and possibly one day the capital account.
Possibly we can discuss this point from macro and micro points. In 2 points we can find a good solution. From macro side, that from China's state policy we have to open up, that the market open, and also in the financial sector and the industrial manufacturing, even in some companies like CGTN, so we can open to welcome some American high official to be sitting in the office to supervise our business. This is one of the sector that we can cooperate with the American side. From micro side, that all these some production lines and also service industries, especially for IT system, communications, smartphone, and also some payment system, we can also be cooperated with the American side. This is micro side. The macro is a general policy, and the micro side we have many things that to do that with the American side. But the question is that whether our efforts can meet the demands, or whether we can satisfy the appetite of Mr. Trump. I don't believe it. What he is willing to have from China, what he is trying to get back from China, this is a big question, not only for Trump, but for China. We don't understand, even we do not know what he is willing from China, because the trade deficit is very clear. We try to import so many things what we can, but American side didn't open the market. The production line didn't open to China. We'll buy what they don't want to sell to us.
For example, high-tech products.
We don't need to tell high product. No. We just need some products, some services. They don't want to give us. If we're talking, we want to buy higher technology, I think nobody can sell you. This is very logical. But we want to buy normal technology. They even don't want to sell it. So we have to discuss that what the real purpose of the Mr. Trump, that what he has to offer for China, not only the tariff. I think he should do more than China has to do.
Well, American allies such as South Koreans, Japanese, and the Europeans may show some degree of sympathy regarding the concessions that China has made. However, at least on one principle, Europeans and Americans align themselves behind the banner in the crusade against China. That is the transparency and no violation of IPR. However, China is accused of being evasive, if not dodgy, on the issue of industrial espionage and opening up the cyberspace. What do you think of the response from the Chinese side? Because Mr. Orleans, chairman of the National Committee of U.S.-China Relations, said at the recently concluded forum on the economy that unless China opens up its cyberspace, the transaction costs for the American multinationals here would be pretty high because they cannot use Facebook and Google in China. So what do you think of the feasibility that China would be flexible on this issue?
The feasibility existing, but it's difficult to get the goal and the purpose. You know, the standard of transparency. Do we have a standard? These understandings. Nobody can give you what the meaning of the transparency. Okay, they ask the Chinese military to give transparency. What do we need? What weapons we have? For what purpose we develop such weapons? This is transparency? Or what do we have to know about the American side? We know nothing. They always publicly in the TV or in newspaper about the military new inventions, but it doesn't mean this is a transparency. So transparency is a very diplomatic excuse from Western countries to accuse China on the developing countries, and also IPR. They're always thinking that developing countries, developing people, that you are not capable to have new technology. You are so doomed, you are so stupid. You cannot develop new technology. This is a barrier. 1,000 years already. Even in the document from the White House, they announced that all new technologies only created by Americans, not by other countries. What do you mean? This is a totally, how to say, rationalism. So it's not the right way to judge such a problem. If we talk this point with the American side, China and developing countries always in the lower position, because we became the responsibility shoulder. We have to talk in the equal position that who is dealing whom. We cannot say technological espionage from China. My God, nobody knows. I think American side is the best in the world.
Espionage is an industry as old as prostitution.
Yeah.
Many those in the West would argue in a smart way. What do you think of his counter-arguments, Tim?
I think his experience is very different from mine. If you look at foreign companies, and I'll speak specifically about American companies, many are very keen to do business in China, but they're blocked in various ways because China has policies intended to develop China's own industries. And so I don't quite understand the professor's comment on that point. With respect to the U.S. government's intentions, the U.S. government does not say that all technology in the United States has to be American technology. It is true that the foreign investment review process is being tightened because of concerns of a sort of government-led strategies to acquire sensitive technologies. And it's also true that the U.S. is strengthening its export controls. And that has to do with the concern I mentioned a moment ago about national security. But for the most of the economic sphere, there's a lot of open space for our two countries to do business. And I think that at the end of the day, the U.S. government and the U.S. people will welcome that.
No, may I say something? So, you know, some facts shows different stories and the background, especially one of the popular excuse from Western side against China is that the Chinese government asked the foreign company to give a technological transfer
coercively.
But you know, it's not true.
They said we asked for the transfer of technology through a coercive
I have asked from some company from Western country, from United States, you give me an example who has already given the technical transfer in order to get the market. Nobody.
Excuse me, let me alert to the latest development in Europe, where former top banker Mr. Zhou Xiaochuan said to participants of an economic forum, at the local level, government officials might have abused their sense of anxiety to attract overseas investment, particularly high technology, coercion may have been applied at the local level, but he argued that the central authorities in China may not have a clear idea about what was going on.
Even in local government, local level, nothing realized, because the foreign company is not so stupid to give technical transfer for the market. Nobody gave it. Actually, no company that give their technology transfer to China without getting paid or without the market. So this is the fact. But the local government and officials try to give a good performance. They say we have so many foreign investment here, and we have so many good technologies. But in fact, it's not the real story. I think that some American officials or decision makers, their decisions are based on some wrong information.
Let me give a different type of example. New energy vehicles. The Chinese government published rules that say that starting in another year, if you sell internal combustion engine vehicles here, you also must sell a certain percentage of new energy vehicles. And so if you're a foreign company and you have a joint venture here and you're selling several million cars, all of a sudden you also have to sell a certain percentage of new energy vehicles. Now, if you try to build them in your home country and export them to China, they'll be subject to a 25% duty, and so you won't be able to reach that market share. And if you sold 2 million vehicles, then you may have to sell 100,000 all-electric battery vehicles, or else you have to restrict your other sales. So the only way you can meet that quota and continue to sell the cars you were already selling here based on your previous investments is to start to build those cars in China. Now, if you want to build those cars, you have to set up a joint venture, and to get a license to build the cars, you have to demonstrate that the joint venture has all the necessary technology to build that kind of car. So if you want to continue selling the cars that you sold last year, you have to start building electric vehicles here and bring the technology here. So you can say that that's not coercion, but it's a very unusual policy that you don't see in other countries. Let's suppose you're an American company, you're going to build a new plant, $5 billion investment. If you build it in China, you may get some subsidies to help you build it, and in addition, you know you'll have very good access to the China market because you're here, and you can ship it back to the US market because it's open. If you build the same plant in your home country of the US, you can sell in the US, but you may have trouble selling in the US market, in the Chinese market.
Thank you so much, Tim. Well, I'm afraid we can talk for hours to address grievances from each side. The issue is whether channel of negotiations could still remain open. Now, with the gun pointing to the Chinese head, I wonder this is going to work. I promise to hold more of such discussions about the prospects of the trade negotiations between the two biggest economies. Until then, goodbye. In fact, I really wanted to talk about the